So we've set up our application to use the camera and storage. And we've added a dynamic image view to our profile activity. I'm going to add a little bit of padding just to push it down a bit here. So maybe my image view. I'll set a margin top of maybe 20 dp. So now what we need to do is we need to check the user permissions. We need to check if they've already authorized our Fire Music app to use the camera and the storage. And if they haven't, we've got to prompt the user, are you allowing our app to use these features of the device? So we're going to write two functions in here. Doesn't really matter where we put them. I'll just put them maybe after my onCreate. So we'll need two functions, and then we'll need to call those functions from onCreate. So the first one we'll just call check permissions. Check permission, which will return a Boolean. We can use features of the operating system to tell us if the permissions have already been granted, because Android stores those permissions. So we're going to use the context compat class, and it has a check self permission method. So we want to call this. So what are we checking? The context is our application context, is our app. That's the first parameter. The second parameter is a string. Which is the Android manifest dot permission dot okay. So first we're checking whether our app has already been granted permission to the camera. So if that is equal to, put this on a new line. We're going to say whether that is equal to package manager dot permission granted. We also want to check the external storage permission. So this is checking if the camera has already been granted access by this app. So we're going to end. We want to do the same thing. Okay, so we're going to copy this. This time, instead of the camera, the permission is going to be read external storage. I think I have a bracket problem. Bear with me for a second. I'll take that bracket out. There. So we're checking that both the camera and the read external storage permissions have been granted. So this is going to return a true if both conditions are true. It'll return false if one or both permissions are not enabled. If you want, we could we could write more code and check these one at a time, set two Boolean values, and then evaluate if they're both true. This is just kind of shorthand for doing it. So we could say, if check the camera permission is permission granted, camera equals true. If read external storage dot permission granted, then storage equals true. And if both are true, return true, otherwise return false. So there's our check. If either one of these are false, then we need to request permission. So we're going to use the built-in Android part of the activity compat library. We want to request permissions. And this will pop up a dialog, and we can request one or more permissions in this same method. So notice here it accepts an array. What permissions do you want to ask the user to grant? So for this activity, we want read external storage and camera permission. Oh, we're going to need a constant here. We'll have to define that above. So I'll accept the references for these two constants, read external storage and camera. This one I'm going to create the actual code we need, or can set as a constant. The permission request code, it's a constant in Android. It represents an integer value of 101. So we could either hard code the value of 101 right in. We could actually just hard code the value of 101 right in here, or we can declare it as a constant. I'll declare it as a constant because we're going to need it in a few other places. So up at the top of our class here, so this is the Android default for permission granted. That's 101. So that's the value we'll get back when we ask the user for permission and they say yes. It's going to return us a value of 101. So we're going to use that value when we are asking. We want two permissions. So first ask the user if they can, I guess we could put the camera first, doesn't really matter. Probably makes sense to have the camera first because we're not interested in the storage if they won't let us use the camera. Camera comes first, storage comes second. So it will ask the user, prompt them in this order, whatever order we put them in the array, that's the order they're going to get prompted. So we're going to want to call these methods when the user clicks on our image view. Before we can use the camera, we're going to see, have they already granted permission to the camera and the storage? If so, that's great. If not, we then need to request permissions for them. So this will run first. Do we already have access? If not, request access. So this user already allowed the app to use camera and storage. I guess I should have put these comments on first. With permission not already granted, ask user if app can use. So we're going to run check permission first. If it returns false, then we're going to run request permission. So now in our onCreate, we'll add a click handler for our image view. We'll also just create one other kind of method stub, which we will fill out. So I'll create one other function. We'll create a function called take picture. For right now, we'll just put in a toast message. I know I forgot. I forgot to make text. There we go. So for now, we'll click the camera button. We'll check the permissions. If there's no permissions, we'll ask for permission. And if all of that is accepted, we'll just display a toast message for right now. We'll do this in steps. Once we have this working, then we can use it. We'll rewrite this method. So this will use an intent. So this would use an explicit intent to invoke the camera. But we won't do that part yet. We'll come back to that. Any questions so far about what's happening here? So let's go to our onCreate. And so we can set an on-click listener. So first we'll call check permission. So if check permission returns true, the user's already authorized the camera and storage. So in that case, we can call take picture. So in this case, permission already granted. If not, we'll need to call request. The other thing that we can do, we can run it like this. But if we run it like this, here's what's going to happen. The first time we click the button, it's going to check permissions. Those permissions don't exist, and it's going to prompt us, give us 2 prompts. So we'll say, yes, I want to allow these things, but then nothing happens. We would then need to click the button a second time in order to invoke our take picture. The other thing we can do is in our request permission, we also want to be able to handle an activity result. So if request permission is granted, it then immediately calls take picture if they've said yes to both. Otherwise, we got to click the camera, say yes to the permissions, and then we got to click the camera again. That I'll run it, we'll see that, and then we should be able to change that. In order to see it a second time, though, I may have to cold boot my device because once the permission's granted, the permission should be saved to the OS. So once they approve the permissions, we want it to then call the take picture function if the user grants it. One other thing to note, the permissions are not user-based. The permissions are app-based, meaning if one user signs into the app and grants permission and signs out, and another user signs in on the same device, the permission's already granted by user A, by the first user. So let's try this and see what happens. I'll go to the profile. I'll click on the camera. So it checks our permission. Both of those return false. So first it says, do you want to allow? So if I allow, and then it asks if it can use the file system. So I'll say allow. Now notice our toast message doesn't get called. It never calls take picture here. We only call take picture if the permissions are already set. So if I click it a second time, it now runs my function. So if we want, we can add a check that if they click OK to both permission requests, we then call take picture, so they don't have to start the process again. So I'm going to add an activity result method for that. I'm going to override the on request permission activity result. So it's got a few parameters in the signature, the request code, an array of permissions, so when we have a request code, so we're going to evaluate the code. So if the user granted results to us, if the user granted permissions, we're going to check. So we're expecting to get 2 results back, right? We've asked for 2 permissions. So we're going to check that each one of them, the result was permission granted to each one. If the user granted both permissions, then we're going to call the take picture method. So the user doesn't have to click the camera the second time. Maybe do it this way so we can see. And oh, sorry. So if both permissions were granted, then call take picture. Otherwise, we can show the user a message saying you must grant the permissions in order to change the profile photo. So what this does is it automatically then calls take picture as soon as the user grants. They say allow to each permission. They don't have to click the camera. They don't have to click the camera a second time. Now, I'm not sure if we can actually simulate this because I've already accepted. Ben? That's a good question. Well, if they're denied, so if you click it and it says you're denied, and then you try it again, it's going to ask you again. Let's try it. I'm not sure. Yes, there is a way. I haven't tried to do it, but could we override like the default screen? You mean? Yes, I think there's a settings intent. So we should be able to go to the permissions settings with an intent. We could do that. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna run this again. Let's see what happens. It shouldn't ask me. So I've already accepted the permissions. If I cold boot my device or I run it on another device, actually that might be a better way of doing it. Maybe I should pick a tablet. I'll run it on the tablet. And then this time, as soon as it prompts me, as soon as I say okay, it should automatically display the toast message. I shouldn't have to click the camera a second time. I mean, it's functional that way, but it's not clear to the user after they accept the permissions, they have to click the camera again. So this way, it will invoke the camera as soon as they accept the permission request. So on a different device, I should get, and I don't think I'm going to get the prompts on my Nexus 5 on my phone. We can try it while that's loading. Because nothing helps like your performance than running multiple device emulators at the same time. Yes, I guess I could uninstall the app. That's true. I'll go to my profile. It shouldn't prompt me for permissions now. Right? It just runs my take picture. Here's my toast message. So those permissions are stored. We can try if I log out and log in with a different account. Maybe I'll try logging out. So I'll sign in with Google. But the permissions are not based on my user account. It's simply based on the device. So the device has permission. So, sorry? Ah, okay. That's a good idea. That would be, yes, okay. So yeah, that's one way to simulate it. Probably faster than waiting for my other device to load, which it won't. So I'm going to sign in with Google, go to my profile. It shows me my toast, so it doesn't ask me for permissions. So if we go into our settings, that's a good suggestion. Okay. So here's Fire Music. So maybe we can clear the data from here, which would clear the permission. So I'll clear my storage. And I'll clear the, okay. I'll stop the app. Actually, it actually shows no permissions granted. Thank you. That's what you were pointing at? All right. I understood you. I got you. Okay. So now I'll open the app again. So we've cleared those permissions. Thank you for the suggestion. Good suggestions. So I'll sign back in. I've cleared out those permissions. And now it should prompt me again. So as soon as I say allow a second time, well, that's interesting. Okay, it didn't call or take picture. So what did we do wrong? Our grant results aren't empty. So I expected it would call our take picture method. Okay, so now if I click it again, now my permissions are granted. All right, I have to think about that one. I may come back to that. So now if we look at our app and go back to the app info, so now we can see it's got the camera and storage permissions set by me allowing this. I'm going to leave this and come back to it. It's useful, but I won't carry it. I think the issue, it's a small issue as to why our request permissions result. Both of those permissions were granted, so I'm not entirely sure why it didn't call our take picture right away. All right, we'll come back to that. Now we actually want to try to use the camera. So right now our take picture method doesn't do anything. All it does is show a toast message. So we'll comment that out. So we're going to create an intent. So we're going to use the Android Media Store class. And we want to use action image capture. That means camera. This is going to generate a file. So we're going to create a separate function called image file. I know it's going to complain right now. That's okay. We'll write this function next. And then we need to get a URI, Universal Resource Indicator. And this is where we're using a file provider that we configured back in our manifest. We're going to call get URI for file. Now we could hard code in the package name, or we can read it dynamically in case our package name updates. There's one more parameter we need. I think we'll need to import URI class. And we'll need to import the file from java.io. So this is complaining there's no create image file method. We'll write that one next. So we're going to use an extra. We did this weeks ago. So we're attaching the URI onto our intent. And then we call start activity for result. Our intent. We're going to use a constant request image capture. This is a constant. We'll want to declare this is what the camera uses when we're requesting to take a photo. It uses a value of 1, so we could put in a value of 1 here, or we could declare it up to the top as a constant. If I put in 1, it should work. But I'll create this as a constant up above and give it a value of 1. So up at the top of our class, we'll declare so this is our Android default. So we have 2 more things we need to do. We have this, we've called this create image file method that we don't have yet. So we've got an error here. We need to create this method that returns a file object. We also need, just like we have an activity result event handler for the request permission event, we're also calling an intent. We're using an intent to start an activity and we're going to get a result back. So we're going to need an event handler there too that processes that camera event. So we'll create our create image file method. That returns a file. So that makes our error on line 141 go away. We'll write this method, then we'll take a pause, and then we'll come back, we'll deal with our activity result event handler in a bit. So we're actually, it's going to be a bit strange. We're actually going to have 2 separate methods to save. We're basically saving 2 different copies of the file. It's a bit complicated. We can actually, we'll start with just using this one method, and this should allow us to generate the photo and display it in the app. The challenge is going to be, we're going to get a permission issue later on when we want to take that file and save it to Firebase. Because our app has access to the file, but nothing else does, including Firebase. So we're going to need to make a copy somewhere else so that we can also take that file and save the path to Firebase. So when the user comes back later or tomorrow and clicks on the profile, we can pull up that path, that image path. And there's a link, I'll throw it up on Blackboard. We can poke around that kind of explains this. It's sort of messy. So we'll just write this file and then we'll have a pause. We're going to get a timestamp to uniquely name the file. So we'll just use the current date time with seconds. So that'll ensure that every file is named uniquely. We don't have to worry about overwriting files. Whoops. And we'll import from java.util date class. So this will help us ensure we've got a unique name. We're going to point this to a we want to get the external files directory from the operating system. And what we want is the pictures directory. So once we use the camera, the photo should get stored in the Android photo gallery. That's one of the two places we're going to put it. We're going to set up, store the Android photo gallery. We're also going to check if that directory doesn't exist, we'll make it. Create the directory if it's not found. So we're going to create a temp file with our timestamp. We'll give it a .jpg extension, and we're going to save it to our storage directory. Our method returns a file. So we'll return it. So we're going to uniquely name it, set up a place to store the file, and create the file. And then return the object back. One other thing we're going to want to do, because we're going to need to access this file later, we're going to create a global variable here that will capture the path to this file, because we're going to need it later on to make a copy of it. So I'm going to create a string variable up at the top. To the photo taken. So I'll just create a variable called current path. Which will be a string. That should be a nullable string. So we'll initialize it to null. And then in here, we'll, in our create image file, we'll set this current path. So we know where this file is. So current path will equal image dot absolute path. So that'll give us the full path to the file. Oh, I can't use val. I can use var or lat. Sorry. So this still won't actually save our file because the thing we're missing is the activity result event handler. So our take picture, it invokes an intent, but we're never handling the result of it. We've got to handle the result of this in order to call create image file. So I can run this right now. But if we go and look in the photo gallery, the file's not going to be there yet. We still need an event handler. Actually, maybe not. Maybe we'll see. Let's see. I'll go back, run it again. Let's see what happens. We'll take a break in a minute. Okay. We can try to use the camera and then we can go and look in our photos, see if it's there. So we'll go to our profile. We'll try the camera. So it calls start activity for result, but we haven't handled this yet. So we need an event handler to manage this intent. So everything we have, I think we need, but we'll need this event handler before we can actually finish this. So I'll put what we've done so far up. I know it's a lot of code. Sorry.